Hello, dear audience, and welcome to What the Fraud, a podcast by SumSub where digital fraudsters meet their match. I'm Thomas Taraniuk, Head of Partnerships here at SumSub, the global verification platform helping to verify users, businesses, and transactions as well. Today's episode is a special one. We're coming to you straight from Money20 Europe in Amsterdam, the heartbeat of the fintech world this week, where the big topics are fast-moving innovation, rising risk, and what it really takes to build trust in modern finance. And this time we're partnering with the C-Suite podcast, bringing you inside the room with the people shaping the future of money and stopping fraud before it starts. So let's get into it. So now I'm sitting, of course, with Spencer Hanlon, Chief Operating Officer, otherwise COO at Nium as well. So thank you for joining us today. Very excited to have you on the What the Fraud podcast.
So, nice to be here. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Nice to be here representing Nium.
And Spencer, you've worked in both payments, fintech, and travel as well, which is very unique. Two high-speed, high-risk environments as well. What's changed most in your approach to operational risk over the time that you worked within both industries and sectors?
So, first of all, it's not getting any easier, right? We operate in an area that, unfortunately, is the target of some very clever people with some very negative motivations. So you have to be on your game, and that just means you have to invest in the tech. Luckily, we have AI on our side. That's making it easier. It's making it easier for us, but it's also making it easier for the opposition. And so we have to stay on our game there and get the right people with the right knowledge and skill set to bring that advantage to us. But it's all about people. At the end of the day, you've got to hire the people who know what they're doing, who have the background and that landscape of threat awareness to be able to keep us on our guard. Because, as I said, unfortunately, it's an ongoing war battle. It never ends. The unusual thing about fraud is it's common. So we don't need to compete on this. We can collaborate as partners in the industry, and that's to our betterment.
100%. And do you think these fraud or criminal networks will still have, let's say, the same strategy or tactic? Hiring first, hire good criminals, make sure that they know the industry, they're using AI tools, and they're able to circumvent systems which have... And I mean, you're completely right as well. Businesses do need to work together because the weakest link, of course, will make it more difficult for other businesses as well.
I hear all the stories of black hat conferences and events in Vegas and all that sort of stuff. I'm not sure whether that's urban myth.
It's not myth, is it?
I don't know. But I got to believe that these guys are investing just as much as we are. But the other thing I would sort of advocate to anybody who's concerned about this is keeping them up at night. The more center lane you stay, right? So the more you restrict your appetite for risk until you understand what you're doing, the safer you're going to be. I mean, it sounds like apple pie and straightforward advice, but stay center lane, and then when you understand expanding from that to other more risky verticals, then first of all do your homework in terms of the controls and the measures you need to put in place, and that will see you right. The worst thing you can do is to step into these verticals without the knowledge of what you're doing. That's where you fall foul, because these players know who's coming in, know who's setting up shop, and they're the first people that they go after.
Spencer, it sounds like you've had a plan in terms of your future fraud risk controls at Nium as well. What does the risk and growth trade-off look like at Nium as you move forward?
So there's no doubt that there is increased revenue opportunity the further you go from the center path. Everyone wants to stay center because that's exactly where it's safest, but it's also the most competitive part of our business. The more you deviate from that, the more upside there is in revenue potential. Again, the trick here is not to get distracted by that revenue potential. Step very cautiously and carefully, baby steps, bring people along who have been in those verticals to guide your business from the operations, from the risk management, and from the revenue side.
Got it. And of course, from your perspective, you're looking at Money 2020 with a few big topics in mind, right? Embedded finance, of course, is one of them at this event as well. When fraud starts to happen on Nium's partners' platforms, let's say, it can still hit Nium's infrastructure.
It can.
Right? How do you manage that kind of distributed external risk at Nium, and especially as you look forward to different types of fraud which are coming into play in practice?
It's a challenging area. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Having to police your customers and partners is never a fun experience.
Always
right?
very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
We're here to serve our customers and to provide them the best products and services and experience as possible. However, unfortunately, we are in an industry where we have to take obligations from our regulators and from our partners and pass them on to our customers. And so the majority of people in this industry have been on both sides of the fence. They understand what it feels like to have enhanced due diligence done on you from customer or supplier. And I think it's all about respect, openness, and a degree of flexibility. Right? If an audit is delayed by 1 or 2 days, don't freak out. Right? It's the way the industry is run, and it's transparency. Where alarm bells start ringing is where you feel like you're not being told the whole truth. And that's something you start to feel after being in the industry for a while.
Trust is of the utmost, right? Especially between external third parties. And I can imagine how difficult it is to run a program which is international with different licenses as well and different partners and different jurisdictions. It makes it ever more complicated. And of course, at Money 2020 and especially in 2025 as we move into 26 as well, RTP or real-time payments is a massive topic, and it creates new expectations for both speed, agility, but also increased pressure on your team, for instance, right?
Yep.
At the end of the day, and at your scale, at Nium, how do you keep risk and compliance systems agile enough to keep up with expectations from businesses and from end users as well?
So the tools you use, the profiles you have, the expectations you have on the transactions coming through all help you in terms of increasing your straight-through processing. That ultimately, if it's automated and it doesn't need a human hand to touch it, that's how you can deliver the promise 9 times out of 10. If it does come out of what you expect, then it's about people, SLAs, operational excellence, and again, an understanding between you and the customer about what your SLAs are on please, I'll ask you for a piece of information, please come back to me within a certain time frame. And that comes from a maturity in the relationship.
Cadence and communication is key, absolutely.
Yeah.
And going back to trust, it's super important there. But of course, it's Money 2020. We're always looking ahead at different types of fraud, different trends, different technologies which are coming into play as well. So, Spencer, from your perspective, what's one shift in global payments, or let's say compliance as well, you think will reshape fintechs and how they handle fraud and how they handle risk in the future?
There's one thing that's a challenge and one thing that's potentially a boon. The challenge is, as you mentioned it earlier, real-time payments.
Yes.
I remember the days when if you sent a transaction to Malaysia, okay, it arrives in 5 days. What's the big deal, right? Now it's about, has it arrived in 5 seconds? Actually, what I think we need to be talking more about is on-time payments. When did I say it was going to arrive, and has it arrived when I said it was? Payroll is a perfect example of that. So the fact that we're getting more and more impatient with when things arrive, that makes fraud management harder, right? No doubt about it. AI is the potential solution to that, but I can force multiply the intelligence I'm putting on these transactions. So that I'm really, really thrilled about, because it means I don't need to have hundreds and hundreds of people working on the problem.
100%. Less spreadsheets as well, of
Exactly.
course. But today's day and age, instant gratification is the name of the game, right? If they hear that they're going to get an instant payment, and of course their colleague, friend, or employee is going to receive that as soon as possible, what does that mean? What's ASAP nowadays? It's usually within a second.
It's seconds.
Yeah.
It is seconds. Again, however, it doesn't always need to be, right? I think we are marching towards a drumbeat that's slightly unnecessary. What is the critical thing is, when does it need to be there? Right? Does it need to be there by midnight? Does it need to be there by 9 a.m. next morning, by close? That's what I think we should all be driving towards, because that allows us the time and the space to do everything we need to do to protect our money, to protect the customer's money, and to satisfy the whole ecosystem in terms of the security of it.
Absolutely agree with you, but unfortunately fintechs and SMEs are market and consumer driven, right? And consumers want everything done yesterday, which makes it very, very difficult to put in that friction to make sure that we save them money and we protect them from bad actors, which is a shame, right?
Yep, absolutely. But that's the excitement of it, right? That's what we're all trying to do.
That's a challenge, and that's where we're innovating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, completely. Well, thank you so much, Spencer, for joining us on the What the Fraud podcast. It's been a pleasure. I have Clarena Furtado joining us from PagSeguro, who is the head of online international business as well. Thank you for joining us on the What the Fraud and C-Suite podcast today.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure. So your parent company, PagBank, has seen rapid growth, of course, in Brazil, but also, of course, beyond as well. What's been the most important move from your perspective, Clarena, when you've made, let's say, the scaling across Latin America whilst keeping, of course, your risk in check?
Yeah. Well, it's been a challenge, but we have had great success in Brazil because in Brazil we are a bank and acquirer, so it's a good combination. What we have done is, like you said, we have cross-sell our products from Brazil going into LATAM. So going into LATAM is a lot about getting the right partners, getting the right local payments, getting the right, relationships in the region, in the different countries that we are. So what we do is we sell, of course, all the robust solutions that we have in Brazil. And then when we go into LATAM, getting those partners in place, whether it's the operational partners, whether it's the fraud partners, whether it's the different local payment partners. But that is essential because it's part of what we sell, and that's why we have had such big success.
That's great to hear. And of course, it's one thing managing internal risk parameters, frameworks, right? But working with so many great partners, it's essential, of course, to make sure that you manage risk on the procurement side. How do you do that at PagBank and PagSeguro?
Yeah, well, we have a lot, like I said, a lot of risk partners, a lot of solutions, working a lot with AI, working a lot with data. So there's a lot about data because like we work different verticals. So we also work through different payment methods. So the risk will be different on the payment methods. It will be different on the different verticals. We are diverse as far as verticals, so we work from a retail company to a sports betting company to a travel company. So the risk is different because the consumer is different. And also when you go into LATAM, the risk in each one of the countries is completely different. We have, for example, we have Brazil, and then we have 4 local entities, which is Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and Chile. And it's a different scenario. It's a different landscape when you look at the risk. Even though some characteristics remain the same, you got some verticals that are more high risk. So like I said, having the right partners, looking at the data, using AI and everything that the new technology has in place has helped us kind of manage that risk. But it's always keeping an eye here and keeping an eye there. So sometimes, like from a sales perspective, why does this become a challenge? Because of course, as we look at the business, we want to grow. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we have that stable and that durable growth. And sometimes, going into high-risk verticals can represent a risk, and we need to make sure that all of the risk rules are in place. Also, when we go into Latin America, we share the risk with the partners. And sometimes we work with the biggest acquirers in the region, and we share the risk with them. So we do like a plan where we, of course, look at the data, but they also look at the data, and we work together to make sure that we have the risk tools in place and that we can manage the fraud that comes in.
So a lot of unique challenges in a very different market, being Latin America, of course. Unique challenges require unique, complex solutions, right? Which it sounds like you have under wraps as well. But Latin America's financial system, of course, and ecosystem has unique challenges in itself, let's say, as a market, of course. What makes financial products, let's say, in Latin America and some of the markets that you've mentioned as well, Clarena, different, but more so, how are you navigating that complexity at hand?
Okay, first of all, Latin America is fascinating as a region.
I completely agree.
Because we have 2 big languages. So we have Brazil with more than 210 million people speaking only Portuguese, and then we have the rest of the region speaking Spanish. But do not be deceived, because the region is very different. So when you get Chile and you compare it to Mexico, you're looking at different landscapes. So some of the things that people make mistakes is think of Latin America as the same. It is not the same. There are different behaviors, different consumer behaviors, different maturities of the market, different regulations. So we also have to face the hurdle of the regulation, which they have to be in place. So when you look also at the risk and managing the fraud, you have to look, for example, also at the chargebacks. You have to look how the regulation looks at the chargebacks, how you're going to manage, how you're going to have the reports in place, what is going to happen. And a lot of them, the region has become, let's say, regulatory. The regulation has been in place, and in the last, I will say, 5-7 years, it has become something that is a big challenge as well. And you have to take that into consideration, because there's a lot of consumer protective laws or policies that are in place that if you don't manage that well, you can end up not in a very good place.
I completely agree. And lots of differences when we're talking about Latin America to Europe, as you've mentioned as well.
Definitely.
Real-time payments, RTP, specifically speaking, PIX, it's reshaping, of course, your expectations. But how do you match that scalability with risk across the region when individuals are expecting speed at the end of the day?
Yes, that's always how you manage that equation. So you might have to manage the equation of course, the user experience. So of course, you want to manage the risk and you want to have the volume, but you also don't want to sacrifice everything for the consumer experience, because if you don't have a good consumer experience, you have nothing at the end. So that's why I say it's different buckets that you have to manage at the same time. So you have to manage, of course, your risk, making sure you have the right tools. You have to manage the user experience, making sure it flows as well. And you have to find the regulation and the different, let's say, behaviors of the consumers in the different countries along the region. So what we do is, for example, when you have an instant payment method like PIX came out in Brazil. It's been in Brazil the last 4 years. It's growing a lot. It's owned by the central bank, so the user experience and a lot is owned by the central bank. But when PIX came out, there were a lot of challenges because, of course, the fraudsters are there. They're looking, especially at the APMs, because they know that they're new to the market and there are fragilities to it. So that's what we have to think about. How are they thinking? So coming into play, sometimes the central bank had to make different things and different, let's say, changes into the product itself, or the time you kind of do the transfer with the PIX is limited. The amount that you can transfer at night is limited, because there were a lot of things happening. So with the help of the central bank and the help of tools, fraud tools that help us manage that, we have come to a good place where we can say that in Brazil, at least, the instant payment methods have been a success. Now, when you go into the regions, you now have other countries in the region also going into the instant payment, methods, like Colombia with Breve. So there's a challenge there as you get a new alternative payment methods, as you get, for example, in Peru, Yape, which is a wallet that is very popular in Peru. You find the challenges of, okay, how am I going to manage this, and how make sure that I have the right tools to be able to manage, that behavior and to manage those results.
Completely agree.
So it's a constant challenge of things that you have to do.
And it's evolving, right? I'm sure if we had this meeting again in 2026 at Money2020, we'll be talking about different things, because it is constantly evolving, and fraud tactics do evolve based on, of course.
And that's what's so fascinating, because it's evolving. Because what happens is, in the region especially, you have a young population coming. So you have young people. And young people, I have to say, I have my children, I have my grandchildren. So there's a lot going on, and I see their behavior. I see how very different they behave. And they want fast, they want secure payments, they want fast payment.
Instant gratification.
Instant gratification. They have no patience for anything. That's the way it is. And that's a new generation that is coming. And that's the consumers that we work with. So that's why alternative payment methods are a big thing. They are going to each time be more refined, each time be more mature, and we have to adapt to these young population expectations.
So, Clarena, another question for you then. How are you matching or ensuring at PagSeguro that, of course, the user expectation is met in terms of the user flow and time to, of course, payment or receiving payment, And as well as that, making sure that you stay ahead of emerging threats, AI fraudsters, etc. as well.
Yeah. Well, we look at the user experience very seriously. So we have teams that are managing the user experience because, like I said, I have to manage all parts of it. I have to manage the user experience, but at the same time, I have to manage the risk. So we have teams looking at that and making sure that, yes, that we manage the risk, that we get the volume in, but at the same time, we're not making mistakes. We're not going the wrong way, that the user experience in a flow. That only happens by having partners, by having solid partners that can work with us, not only in Brazil, but in the region as well. Partners that know the local behavior, that have data for the local behavior, that can help us manage this, because you are only going to manage fraud and you're only going to manage risk through AI and through the new technologies that are coming in, but also through the data, understanding when are these consumers buying, what are they buying, what is the average ticket, how often do they buy, what vertical they belong to. So understanding that on a local perspective is essential for the success that we have had at PagSeguro managing risk.
Amazing to hear. And Clarena, it sounds like you're very experienced specifically in this regard as well, and working with fintechs at PagSeguro, and of course making sure that they know the threats which are out there is essential as well. So if there are any fintechs, let's say in Latin America, as it's expanding massively as a sort of region in terms of payments and adoption of digital services and digital financial inclusion, what would you say is one strategic mistake that you see way too often? And what would you say one of these fintechs would need to do differently in the future based on this mistake as well?
Yes, well, first of all, thinking that it's going to be easy. Thinking and kind of not taking into account the different challenges that you have. Over and over, I talk to big global partners and they say, oh, we are in Brazil and it's been 8 months and we haven't been able to integrate, because they think, okay, it's going to be easy because it's going to be smooth. Well, do not make that mistake. First, understand what is the landscape in the different countries that you're going to, especially when you look at Latin America. Look at the regulation. Look at the tax implications. Look at the user experience. Look at everything that is going on in the ecosystem and how you are going to be able to approach that market. Not necessarily because you have a good product and you think that there is a need for that product and that you have the demand and the supply equation solved. You are going to be able to implement that as fast as you want it to.
Makes sense.
Need to understand the local landscape. You need to make sure you have the right partners, that you have consulting people who are kind of teaching you how that market works. Taxes are a complex thing in Latin America. Regulation is a complex thing, and it is very different from country to country. Regulation, you have countries like Chile, where regulation is heavily being enforced. Then you have countries like Mexico, extremely bureaucratic as far as what you need to do to implement a new company in Mexico. You need to belong kind of to the circle of the government and make sure that you have the right connections.
Yes.
Don't go by yourself. Don't be mistaken that it's going to be, I want to come in, I set up a local entity, and I'm set to go. Not necessarily. So make sure you have the right partners, whether it's the partners or law firms that are going to teach you about taxes and regulation, whether it's fraud and risk partners that know the region well and that know the local challenges well. But you need to make sure that you have the whole project and the whole plan, because over and over I tell you, people are making those mistakes and then they kind of lose the opportunity, because this is all about the opportunity. This is all about getting into the market and acting rapidly, because the consumers have a need and they move fast and the competitors move fast. So you want to make sure that you go in and you set up an expectation 3-4 months to happen, and it happens. But if you are not set and if you go in the wrong way, you will be looking at much more time and like a year or more. And like I said, this is not about small companies I'm talking to. These are big global companies that have taught me during the process, okay?
Absolutely agree with you. And a fragmented ecosystem in Latin America, but of course one that should work together towards what is a borderless criminal, let's say, well, financial crime is borderless, right? So what is a very difficult environment. And I'm glad to have some, like PagSeguro, of course, helping these fintechs on their journey, big, small, and medium-sized, of course, as they move forward as well. So, Clarena, thank you so much for your insight here at Money2020. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here today.
Ian, welcome to, of course, Money 2020. How have you found the event thus far?
Yeah, I found it really good. I think it's a great place to come and meet various stakeholders in the industry, and we were saying before we came on that I think you just get a real spread across our customer base come. So yeah, really good. Make some good connections.
Excellent. And Ian, you're the general manager for payments and of course platforms in Europe, and the CEO of Tink in the UK.
Yeah.
As well as it's quite an exciting, of course, position, area or subject area to be in at the moment, especially with new technologies coming through, different types of payments, and especially being at Money 2020 surrounded by merchants, new payment institutions, and there may be a future of scary types of fraud as well. Open banking, of course, has also come a long way in the last couple of years as well, but adoption still lags in certain places from what we can see especially. What are the biggest blockers from your perspective as we move forward?
Yeah, I think you're right, it has. I mean, from the foundation sort of early PSD2, there was a lot of hype around the disruption that was maybe going to come as a result of that. And I think we have seen some earlier adopters picked up, particularly in sort of account funding use cases, that's grown very strongly. We've seen that continue to grow. Today is probably the best use case that's out there. I think the big difference that I've seen over the last sort of 12, 18 months really is that 3 years ago people were buying open banking so that they could, because they thought they had to have open banking. Whereas now what I'm seeing is merchants actually coming to market and saying, hey, look, I've got this use case, I've got this journey, this customer experience that isn't working so well. How can I use open banking, pay by bank, account information to make that journey smoother? And so the deployment's more thoughtful, and now we're actually seeing the volume go. I think you'll see that uptick now over the next year or so.
That's great to hear. And moving fast, especially in regulated environments, it's really tough, right? It's difficult to navigate, and it makes it less simple when you're trying to build things, right? So how do you keep, let's say, Tink's commercial teams up and moving forward, pushing for growth and growth value within today's day and age, but also still operating within the guidelines of regulation as well?
Yeah, I think it's super important to have I'm going to say this, a compliance function that works, and having a really strong legal component in there that works very closely and is aligned with the business goals and the purpose and the teams. And then I think we need to make sure that the teams understand the rules by which they're playing in and what is required of them. But actually having those strong support functions who are aligned and work very closely with the teams means that you can push forward with confidence.
That's a foundation as well, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah.
Absolutely agree there. And trust is a major theme, especially within businesses, but we've talked a lot today about third parties as well. Trusting your third parties, even if they're not regulated as software providers, even if they're not regulated, of course, you still bear quite a lot of the risk on their behalf, and having that good cadence, trust and communication is essential as well. From your perspective, what are the biggest threats or challenges that you see in the future from Tink when we're talking about today's payment flows, and how do you think they should be solved?
That's a big question, very broad question. I think, you mentioned trust there. I think if you're going to see anything grow, anything adopted by the consumer, there has to be trust there. How do you build trust? The experience has got to be solid. It's got to be easy and simple. And it needs to pop up in multiple places where you already have trust in whatever it is that you're doing. So if it's funding an account that you've always funded manually, and now you have a simple, easy flow that enables you to do that, that can start to build trust. Then maybe when you see it pop up in an e-com website, you're like, I see that, I know that, I'm going to use it. And I think we'll see more and more, we're seeing it now, but more and more thoughtful journeys so that the consumer's educated coming into those flows, and that's where we're seeing the sort of success increase.
Agreed. And it's also about managing the expectations, I would assume, of the consumer, because at the end of the day, if they go to a flow which they're very used to, and it turns out to be twice as long, we put in a speed bump, we put in some friction, they're going to be disappointed, you're going to have drop off, and they're going to go to someone else. And that's something that you don't want at the end of the day, right?
No, exactly. But then, I was talking to customer the other day just around, we work really hard to take friction out of a journey. But then if it's your end of tax year and you want to top up, an ISA or a pension, you're going to move £20,000, £10,000, you want a little bit of friction in there, just to give, actually that gives the consumer a bit more confidence that right, there's my bank app. Yes, I can see that. I'm authenticating in my bank app, and that's the right thing to do. So I think, we work very hard to take friction out of the journey, and then in some places we maybe add just a little bit back.
Some places it's foundational, right?
Yeah,
Especially if you're moving your life savings and you realise they've gone in a millisecond, and that can be quite scary.
It's going to the right place, exactly.
And of course, we're at Money2020. A major theme that we're seeing today is embedded finance. But the key question is still there. Who owns the risk within embedded finance? And where do you think that responsibility falls in place?
I mean, that's a very broad question, but if you sort of narrow it down and say, let's say compliance risk, right? So where does that sit? There's a there's a set of regs out there. We need to comply with those regulations.
Yes.
It tends to be on. We have a couple of different models. Our license, customer's license. Predominantly, it's sort of our license. Therefore, compliance risk sits with that, which is why we have some of that friction in those flows to make sure that we really we know and we have confidence that it's a valid payment and the person who's trying to make the payment or move the funds is the right person. I think that's super important.
And of course, with embedded finance, we're servicing a lot of new businesses, SMEs, fintechs, etc. What would you say is one piece of advice you could give to fintechs trying to scale fast, but also remain compliant at the same time? It's a difficult, broad question, but one for you, Ian.
I think collaboration, actually. So you think about, you asked me at the head of the call, what's really important in our business to be successful, and it's, I said we have a strong compliance function. Well, if you're starting off, you're in open finance, you're going into a new area, there are other people who've got some of that experience, and I think that collaboration across other businesses, organizations, fintechs, that's where you gain your advantage. Talk to people, share, work out how to collaborate together.
And that, of course, enforces trust, which is required, especially within our industries as well. Final question to you. Artificial intelligence. We talk about it a lot. Businesses it's a buzzword. Everyone's talking about it. It's, of course, a great tool which can be used by, of course, the let's say businesses at hand to protect themselves, to make life easier for the users, but it can also be utilized on the other side of the coin by fraudsters to enhance, let's say, their ROI on going and targeting fintechs, payment institutions, but also the end users as well. What would you say there around artificial intelligence use cases within embedded finance, and what would you say of the future in terms of protecting users and businesses at hand?
We've always got to focus on protecting the end consumer. There's always a risk around fraud. We're always, the open banking is, built in a specific way to reduce the likelihood of fraud in any of those flows. So we're alive to it. We work with it all the time. It's just another. It's not just another. It is another angle. We look at it. We work at it. We're all working together. It comes back to collaboration. We need to work with the banks, with the FIs, with the merchants to make sure that we're protecting our end users.
End users, your business, of course, and of course the entire ecosystem and community as well. But very glad to have you in the same boat and working together towards a future without frauds, which may never come, but one can dream.
We do our best.
We do our best, exactly. Ian from Tink, thank you so much for joining us here today on What the Fraud. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Darek Paleczny, the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Worldline. A very exciting but cumbersome role, I can imagine, as well. So thank you very much for being on the What the Fraud podcast here with C-Suite Podcast as well. I'd love to jump into a couple of questions for you.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for the invite.
Amazing. And you're, of course, working on a few conversations here at Money2020 and speaking at this event as well about how digital-first infrastructure, of course, is reshaping fraud and compliance at the same time. And from the merchant services perspective, what shifts are you seeing within this remit and the fraud patterns, of course, and fraud vectors within the fintech payment space as well? How is Worldline adapting to these changes and, of course, these new fraud challenges?
Oh, thank you. That's a really good question. And I think in terms of fraud patterns and what we can see, it's really dynamic. So probably the answer would vary, really, if we answer the question now versus 3 months ago or in 6 months. So it's really something that, same as really fintech world, is developing very quickly. It's changing, it's dynamic. So it's really for us how we can prepare for this. So it's more than just deploying a tool. Okay, we have a good tool, job done, we can move on. It's really about properly embedding and owning the tool and the whole infrastructure. So probably what I mentioned earlier at the panel today, is about tailoring this to your needs, making sure it works well for the business, for the risk appetite, for the customers you have. So it's a bit of buying just out of the shelf product. It's like a bit of buying a sports car. It will be fast. It will take you there. Whether it's the fastest route, not necessarily. So it's about knowing what you need, tune it to your own needs. And then maybe you realize that you really don't drive on the flat surface. Maybe you need a 4x4. And that will be something really what will take you there. So I think it's about, and what we do, making sure that we have also well-synced teams, like first line talking to the second line. So it's about that feedback loop so we can act quickly. Because I think whatever is known to us that it's a potential issue now, you cannot take it for granted that it will work well in the next 6-12 months.
Agreed, and I completely see that happening, especially when so many businesses are different. They service different markets, different industries, different customers, whether or not they're merchants or they're retail customers as well. It means that, as you mentioned as well, Darek, it's not one size fits all. And I love the analogy of a car, because at the end of the day, it might have a nice chassis, it might be very nice, sort of yellow Lamborghini, right? But if the engine's not there, if the mileage isn't there, you're going to have a bad time. And continually adapting, of course, to new trends. In 12 months' time, we're going to be talking about another type of fraud, 2026 Money 2020, and it might be new tactics and new developments that we'll need to envision to move things forward. And of course, with fraud tactics getting more sophisticated, more complicated, and of course borderless as well, what kinds of hidden risks are merchants facing on a day-to-day basis across, let's say Worldline's merchant customer base?
I think it's something critical what I mentioned earlier. It's about making sure that we don't take it for granted, so we don't stand still that, okay, we deploy the control, we're good, we can move on. So it's about constant review, constant feedback loop between the teams, talking to customers. And I think often it's seen like there's that tension between making smooth journey for the customer and then meeting regulatory requirements. And I think now we are really in the era that, in fact, it's complementing one each other. So sometimes, we really make it easier for the customer to onboard. We get easier for the customer to have less friction, having some healthy friction. I think that's really the key. It's like really, because we all think about friction as something negative. Like, and business needs, like we want to make it frictionless. And it's about that healthy friction, giving the security to the business and to the customers. So we are really embedding the risk assessment, like in the constant review and planning as well, as much as you can. Where are we going to be in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months?
Agreed.
So it's not really looking where are we now. And I think it's also probably 12 months ago, there would be a lot of discussions about that we are prepared to scale. And I think it's more being prepared to adapt, because then scale will then come naturally.
But when it comes to compliance as well, what would you envision one common pitfall for fast-growing merchants to be, and what do they tend to overlook around these as well? Can they design, let's say, smarter systems and fraud frameworks to make sure that they overcome these pitfalls in the future?
I think probably the main pitfall that you could see in the market is really leaving compliance for later. So focusing on growth, on the speed of everything.
Yes, yeah.
And I think as well, it's really the focus on the speed. So let's do something that will bring immediate effect, like in 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. So focusing on that results in a very short term. But it's probably more about owning and making sure that it's gonna work in the long run. And then the probably common pitfall is you try to get quick fix because it's gonna bring some value added, and obviously it will. But then and going bit of again to the adaptability, because then it's often way harder to retrofit something. It's much harder to unwind the whole process. So it's about really making sure that you do it right from the very beginning. You don't just try to make shortcuts, because really the edge is in that you have to get it right from the very beginning.
A strong foundation we keep talking about, it's essential from the very get-go for a lot of these small and medium-sized enterprises, especially here at Money2020, to make sure that they have these frameworks from the start will help them scale, and making sure that they can communicate them across business units is essential as well. So artificial intelligence is a hot topic, right? It's transforming the way, of course, that we detect frauds, but also fraudsters aim to circumvent systems, merchant payment, retail payments, and otherwise as well. What is one AI, artificial intelligence powered approach that's actually working today? And do you think fraud teams, even at Worldline, should underestimate it, or should they rely on it exclusively to prevent fraudsters from, of course, taking over?
I think it's really about having the right governance and the right oversight, because the dangerous part is we don't know what we don't know. And I think especially with AI, it's like, if we just assume it works exactly the way we thought it will, it may not. So I think it's as good as your governance that you have in place around it.
Agreed. It's often reactive rather than proactive. There is of course, ROI, profitability to fraudsters and these criminal networks for actually creating these tools and implementing them on a mass scale. And of course, we only know the damage it's done until afterwards, where we can actually build counter solutions, let's say reactively, which can combat them as well. I would like to ask as well, Darek, from your perspective and working with these merchants on a day-to-day basis, what's one piece of advice you would give to their compliance leadership teams at the end of the day to both, let's say, scale responsibly, but also maintain those compliance risk frameworks and foundations to make sure that they're secure and their community are secure as well?
I think it would be a bit of a summary of what we discussed until now. So it's making sure that you don't cut corners. You make it right from the very, very beginning, because then really the challenges are starting. So instead of having less friction, you may create at some point really more friction that it will be very difficult to manage. It's also about ongoing review, making sure that you are on top of it, having the right structure on it. And it's more really to not take it as a tick box exercise. So it's not like, okay, we've made it, it helps us, we reduced whatever time, let's say on the onboarding, it's great. I think it's about going even a step further, making sure it's really that left hand talks to the right hand. So it's the synergy between the systems. So when you have your onboarding, it feeds to your AML transaction monitoring, it feeds to your fraud tool and vice versa. So it's really closing loop and making this really smarter, and then utilize the knowledge and the data you have in place to make it smoother and make it really more informed. Because often it's a data gathering exercise, and then what do you do really with this data? So it's about smart usage of that data.
Smart usage of that data, of course, to spot fraudsters, but also provide a bigger picture of the business at hand and the fraud risks that, of course, could affect the community, the merchants, the users, retail users, and, of course, the shareholders as well. Darek, thank you so much for joining us today on What the Fraud. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this special episode of What the Fraud. We hope you've enjoyed these conversations from Money2020 Europe in Amsterdam. So please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast platform. And if this episode has left you feeling empowered, drop a review. It helps other individuals out there trying to dodge the digital tricksters. So let's cut the small talk and get down to business. So follow, comment, review, you know the drill. And if you want to hear more about what we do here at SumSub and how your business can actually benefit from our verification services, definitely check out our website at sumsub.com and subscribe to our socials. So stay safe and see you on the next one.